weighs only a few grams, small enough to balance on the end of a finger. Yet this tiny object contains clues to an entire economic system. A king's portrait fills its surface. Around him appear inscriptions, sacred symbols, and carefully organized designs. Beneath those images is something even more important: a deliberate weight, precious metal of measurable quality, and the guarantee of a government prepared to place its authority behind both. More than 15 centuries ago, coins like this circulated through the Kingdom of Aksum, crossed the Red Sea, and entered the commercial networks linking Northeast Africa, Arabia, the Mediterranean, and the Indian Ocean. Aksum projected regional power and built monumental architecture, but one of its most revealing instruments of authority was small enough to disappear inside a closed hand. It was money. And through that money, we can trace how an African kingdom transformed metal into confidence, confidence into exchange, and exchange into international influence. Long before an Aksumite ruler placed his portrait on a gold coin, the northern Horn of Africa already belonged to a much wider commercial landscape. Aksum occupied an unusually advantageous position. To the east stretched the Red Sea, with Arabia immediately beyond it. Northward, maritime corridors connected the region with Egypt and ultimately the Mediterranean. Beyond southern Arabia, Indian Ocean networks linked ports around the Arabian Sea and western India. Inland, meanwhile, the Ethiopian and Eritrean highlands supported agricultural communities, settlements, political centers, and routes connecting the interior with the coast. Aksum, therefore, did not emerge from isolation. Its rise occurred in a region where people, commodities, languages, religious ideas, and technologies had moved for centuries. One of the key points in this system was Adulis, the Red Sea port closely associated with the Aksumite state. Ancient descriptions portray Adulis as an important transfer point between inland Africa and maritime commerce. Products from the African interior reached the coast there, while imported commodities entered the region from overseas. Ivory became particularly famous in descriptions of the trade. Tortoiseshell and other valuable animal products were also exchanged. Imported commodities included textiles, manufactured goods, metals, wine, ceramics, and other objects originating beyond the Horn. The precise scale of each category cannot always be reconstructed. Ancient writers had their own interests. Archaeological preservation is uneven. Organic cargoes disappear. Ports evolve, goods are repackaged, and objects can be traded repeatedly. But the broader conclusion is secure. Northern Horn communities were participating in commercial networks that crossed several major regions of the ancient world. Those networks should not be imagined as one merchant traveling continuously from the Mediterranean to East Africa and then onward to India. Ancient commerce usually worked through chains. A producer might sell to a local intermediary. The commodity could then pass to a caravan organizer, reach a coastal market, enter a warehouse, move aboard one vessel, change owners in another port, and continue its journey with entirely different merchants. An elephant tusk could travel far beyond the lifetime movements of the person who originally sold it. A Mediterranean container could reach an inland Aksumite settlement after passing through several hands. Currency could move in similar ways. Before Aksum produced royal coins, merchants around the Red Sea were already familiar with foreign coinage and with precious metal valued by weight. The Aksumites, therefore, did not need to invent the concept of money. They encountered monetary practice through their participation in regional commerce. But there is an important difference between accepting someone else's currency and issuing your own. When a state manufactures coinage, it makes a claim about authority. The piece of metal is no longer anonymous. Its weight is meant to follow a recognized standard. Its composition is supposed to meet an expectation. Its designs identify the authority responsible for it. The coin becomes certified metal. That certification is especially useful in long-distance trade, where uncertainty can be expensive. A merchant receiving an unfamiliar piece of raw gold may want to weigh it carefully, examine its quality, and negotiate its value. A familiar coin does not eliminate those concerns, but it can reduce them. Experienced merchants were perfectly capable of weighing coins, rejecting suspicious examples, or discounting pieces that had lost credibility. Ancient trade was not based on blind faith. Yet recognizable and reasonably consistent currency could make transactions more efficient. For Aksum, establishing a mint therefore represented more than adopting a new artistic medium. A mint required access to metal. It required skilled workers and reliable measurements. It required tools, supervision, repeated production, and decisions about what the finished product was supposed to contain. Most importantly, it required rulers confident enough to put their own authority onto precious metal. Poorly controlled currency could undermine confidence. If weight and metal quality varied excessively, merchants could begin treating the coins as uncertain bullion rather than dependable units. Consistency, on the other hand, created familiarity. This is why the beginning of Aksumite coinage in the late 3rd century represents an important stage in state development. Aksum had already participated in international exchange before minting began. Coinage did not suddenly create its trading connections. What it did was give the monarchy a new instrument within those connections. Instead of allowing foreign currencies and weighed bullion alone to shape high-value transactions, Aksum could now place its own guarantee into circulation. That change is best understood as a move toward monetary sovereignty. Geography had created opportunity, but geography by itself never guarantees political importance. Ports can exist without powerful governments. Trade routes can bypass states that fail to organize them. Valuable commodities can generate competition as easily as prosperity. Institutions determine how effectively those advantages are converted into power. Aksum developed political centers in the highlands, maintained communication with the Red Sea coast, participated in maritime exchange, and eventually issued a currency carrying the names and images of its kings. The earliest coins therefore represent more than the beginning of minting. They mark the point at which participation in an international economy was being translated into a monetary system carrying Aksum's own political identity. Aksum began minting not because it had been separated from the wider commercial world, but because it was already deeply involved in it. Near the end of the 3rd century, a new kind of object appeared in the Aksumite economy. Small pieces of precious metal began carrying the name and portrait of a ruler known as Endubis or Endubis. These coins provide some of the earliest clear evidence for an Aksumite royal monetary system, and they were not merely ceremonial objects. Aksum produced issues in gold, silver, and copper or copper alloy metals. That range immediately tells us something important. Gold represented a high-value level of the system. Silver occupied another. Copper-based pieces allowed substantially smaller quantities of metal value to be represented. We do not possess an Aksumite financial document explaining how many copper pieces officially equaled a silver piece, or exactly how silver was valued against gold. Any precise table would therefore go beyond the evidence. What we can say is that the monarchy developed more than a single prestige denomination. It established a multi-metal coinage tradition that would continue for centuries. Endubis's gold pieces were remarkably small. Surviving specimens cluster around a standard, conventionally reconstructed, near 2.7 grams. Individual examples naturally vary. Ancient coins were handmade rather than produced by modern machines. But clustering matters. When many surviving coins fall close to a target, randomness becomes an unlikely explanation. Somebody had determined approximately how much gold one official unit should contain. Somebody measured the metal. Somebody supervised the process closely enough for repeated coins to remain near that intended range. The visual design was equally deliberate. Endubis appears as king, wearing distinctive royal headgear. Plants frame the portrait. Above him appears the disc and crescent symbol associated with Aksum's pre-Christian religious environment. Greek inscriptions identify the ruler in a language familiar across parts of the Eastern Mediterranean and Red Sea commercial world. The resulting coin communicated several messages simultaneously. It identified the issuer. It connected the ruler with sacred authority. and it presented Aksumite kingship in a visual and linguistic form that could be recognized beyond the highlands. Using Greek did not make Aksum Greek. Quite the opposite. The kingdom was using a language with wide international utility to advertise an unmistakably Aksumite political identity. It was becoming internationally legible without disappearing into somebody else's system. The king's portrait played a crucial economic role as well. Raw gold has no issuing government. A royal coin does. Once a state impressed a ruler's image and inscriptions onto the metal, an anonymous commodity became an official political object. The portrait effectively answered a question that mattered to anyone receiving the piece. Who stands behind this metal? In Aksum's case, the answer was the monarchy. The design therefore traveled together with the value. A stone monument remains where it was constructed. A palace is visible only to those who approach it. A coin can leave the capital, enter a market, move with a caravan, reach a port, cross a sea, and pass into another political territory. Every transfer carries a miniature declaration of royal authority. The recipient may care primarily about the metal, but the portrait still identifies the institution that issued it. That makes Aksumite currency a uniquely valuable historical source. Written narratives for many periods of Aksumite history are incomplete. Coins preserve information that texts sometimes do not. They record royal names and titles. They reveal changes in language. They preserve religious transformations. Their weight and composition expose shifts in monetary policy. Differences between dies can even help numismatists reconstruct sequences of production. A coin is therefore something close to a miniature state document. It tells us not only that a ruler existed, but how that ruler wanted the institution of kingship to be presented. Endubis matters for precisely this reason. His currency marks an expansion in what Aksumite government was capable of doing. The monarchy was no longer simply receiving economic benefits from international commerce. It had begun manufacturing a formal instrument of exchange under royal authority. Behind that achievement stood people whose names have largely disappeared. Engravers cut designs into dies. Metalworkers prepared blanks. Specialists weighed precious metal. Supervisors maintained standards. Officials or royal authorities decided which words, symbols, denominations, and images should appear. A mint should therefore not be imagined simply as a workshop where workers struck metal with hammers. It was an institution. It converted resources into standardized political objects. It translated royal authority into something portable. And once established, it created a system that succeeding Aksumite rulers could inherit and modify. Endubis did not invent coinage itself. Currency had existed elsewhere for centuries. But innovation does not require inventing every component from nothing. A state can innovate by selecting an existing technology, adapting it to local needs, and integrating it successfully into its own institutions. That is precisely what happened in Aksum. With Endubis, the monarchy entered the community of sovereign coin issuers. The king had entered the marketplace, not personally, but through carefully measured metal carrying his image. No surviving Aksumite workshop has provided historians with a complete production manual. We have no payroll listing the mint's employees, no annual ledger stating how many pieces were ordered, and no handbook explaining the exact procedure followed under every king. Yet the coins themselves preserve technical evidence. Combined with what is known about other ancient die-struck currencies, that evidence allows the broad manufacturing process to be reconstructed with reasonable confidence. Everything began with metal. Before an Aksumite gold coin could exist, gold first had to enter the kingdom's political economy. Exactly where each batch originated is far more difficult to establish. The Horn of Africa was connected to regions with access to gold, and African production networks clearly mattered to broader commerce. But identifying the geological birthplace of the metal inside one particular coin is complicated. Gold moves. Jewelry can be melted. Older currency can be recycled. Metal from several sources can be combined. Refining can alter some chemical features. A coin's metal may therefore have had a long and complicated history before arriving at the mint. Once acquired, that metal had to be prepared. Ancient minting was not a matter of casually cutting fragments from a block of gold. The material needed an intended composition and had to be divided into portions approaching an official target weight. Those portions were prepared as blanks, commonly called flans. Methods may have changed across Aksumite history, but the underlying requirement remained the same. Each blank needed to contain approximately the quantity of metal expected for its denomination. Too much precious metal created a problem for the issuer. Too little created a problem for the user. A difference of a fraction of a gram may appear trivial when examining one tiny coin. Multiply that difference across hundreds or thousands of gold pieces, and it becomes financially significant. If every piece is too heavy, the treasury distributes more gold than intended. If every piece becomes obviously too light, confidence may decline. Standardization therefore protected both sides of the transaction. The surviving weight patterns of early Aksumite gold indicate that workers were aiming for identifiable targets rather than creating pieces at random. After preparation came striking. Coins of this type were produced between engraved dies. One die carried the imagery for one side of the coin. Another contained the opposite design. The engraver faced a technically demanding task. The design had to be cut in reverse. Royal portraits, crowns, plants, symbols, borders, and inscriptions all had to fit within an extremely small space. The dies also needed to survive repeated use. Eventually they wore, cracked, or became unusable and had to be replaced. Those changes provide modern scholars with useful evidence. When two surviving coins were produced from the same die, specialists can identify shared details and use these die links to reconstruct production sequences. During striking, a prepared blank was positioned between the dies. Pressure from a hammer blow transferred the designs into the metal. The finished coin was removed. Another blank took its place. The process continued. Because this was manual production, variations were inevitable. A design might sit slightly off-center. One side might be more sharply impressed than another. A worn die could produce weaker details. The blank itself might not form a perfect circle. These characteristics do not indicate the absence of organization. They reveal handmade production. The more important question is whether recognizable designs, approximate weight standards, and consistent denominations persisted despite those variations. They did, and that consistency created something economically valuable: predictability. A merchant who recognized the ruler, imagery, approximate size, and expected weight of an established Aksumite issue could evaluate it more efficiently than an unfamiliar lump of metal. That suggests the mint's most important product was not simply a quantity of coins. It was repeated expectation. One official piece taught users something about what another piece carrying the same authority was supposed to be. Aksumite mints also developed unusual visual techniques. Some silver and copper-based issues incorporated small areas of gold, selectively emphasizing features of the design. A British Museum silver coin of Ezana, for example, preserves a gold-inlaid central element associated with a cross design, while other copper alloy examples also display gilded areas. This reveals a sophisticated understanding of material and appearance. Gold was not merely valuable. Its color attracted attention. A sacred or royal element could be highlighted even when the entire piece was made from less expensive metal. Economics and visual communication therefore operated together. An Aksumite coin could simultaneously embody metal value, measured weight, royal authority, religious symbolism, artistic design, and institutional credibility. None of those qualities alone explains the system. A beautifully engraved coin with unreliable gold content might lose confidence. A precisely weighed blank without recognizable authority would still resemble bullion. The power came from combining standardization with identification. This is why describing Aksum's minting as simple imitation misses the larger achievement. The kingdom certainly adopted techniques already known elsewhere, but it incorporated those techniques into a monetary system shaped by its own government, commercial geography, languages, religious transformation, and artistic conventions. Somewhere within the Aksumite political center, specialists repeatedly converted metal into measured blanks into royal currency, and royal currency into objects capable of circulating beyond the mint. Their identities have disappeared. Their discipline has not. Every surviving coin demonstrates that this process succeeded at least once. Large groups of related coins demonstrate that it succeeded repeatedly. And repeated performance is what turns a workshop into an institution. Gold attracts the eye immediately, but color alone cannot reveal how much gold an ancient coin actually contains. Two pieces can appear almost identical while having very different compositions. For that reason, scientific analysis has become an important part of Aksumite numismatics. Studies of early Aksumite issues indicate that some of the earliest gold coinage was extremely fine. Historical specific gravity measurements of Endubis issues have produced estimates ranging from a little above 90% to close to very high gold purity. Those measurements need careful interpretation. Specific gravity testing is not identical to every modern laboratory method. Individual coins differ. Small samples cannot define the composition of every issue produced during an entire reign. Still, the general result is economically important. Early Aksumite gold was not simply base metal given a prestigious appearance. It contained substantial intrinsic precious metal value. That characteristic mattered in long-distance exchange. A gold coin does not depend entirely on confidence in the political future of its issuing kingdom. If the metal itself contains considerable value, a merchant beyond Aksum can still evaluate it materially. The state stamp adds a layer of identification and expected standardization. The gold adds another source of security. That combination helps explain why precious metal coinage proved useful across political boundaries. Modern analysis can go further than measuring gold content. Researchers can investigate very small concentrations of other elements left inside the metal. These traces may include silver, copper, platinum group elements, and additional chemical components. Under the right conditions, patterns among those elements can provide clues about refining, recycling, mixing, and potentially the origins of metal supplies. X-ray fluorescence can help characterize composition, particularly at a surface level. More sensitive analytical methods can examine trace elements in greater detail. For historians, the possibility is fascinating. The visible surface of a coin tells us who authorized it. Its invisible chemistry may eventually tell us something about where the metal traveled before it entered the mint. But chemistry must not be treated like a postal address. Ancient gold had complicated lives. A piece of jewelry might be melted and reused. Bullion from different regions could be combined. An older coin could become part of a new issue. Refining processes might alter the surviving concentrations of particular elements. Even when a recognizable chemical pattern appears, researchers need comparative geological data and archaeological context before identifying a probable source. A responsible documentary should therefore avoid announcing that one Aksumite coin came from one particular mine unless direct published evidence supports that conclusion. The uncertainty makes the economic story richer rather than weaker. The monarchy clearly needed reliable access to gold, but the supply may have entered through several channels. Some could have arrived through commerce. Some could have been collected through taxation or political obligations. Some may have come from African production networks. Some could have been recycled from existing precious metal objects. The balance probably changed over time, and the coins themselves show that the monetary system changed with it. Early gold generally maintained substantially greater fineness than many later issues. By Kaleb's 6th century reign, published measurements for some coins fall well below the early levels. That does not mean later mint workers simply lost their skills. Changes in fineness can reflect changes in available bullion, government expenditure, commercial conditions, monetary policy, or several pressures operating together. Consider what fineness means economically. Two coins can have identical total weights while containing different quantities of gold. If one is nearly pure gold and the other includes much more silver or copper, the intrinsic precious metal value of the first is higher. A government can therefore reduce the gold represented by an official coin in two major ways. It can make the coin lighter, it can reduce the percentage of gold, or it can do both. Across Aksum's long monetary history, both weight and composition changed. That creates a remarkable financial archive. No royal treasury ledger is required to demonstrate that the amount of gold embodied in Aksumite monetary units shifted over centuries. The coins physically record those adjustments. Interpretation, however, requires caution. Debasement is not synonymous with immediate economic collapse. Governments throughout history have altered monetary standards deliberately. Using less gold per piece allows a limited precious metal supply to produce more currency that can help meet obligations or adjust to changing supply conditions. Whether users continue accepting the revised coinage depends on reputation, exchange practices, expectations, and the role of official authority. Aksum's unusually long coin series allows us to observe this process over generations. Its earliest issues reveal one monetary environment. Later issues reveal another. The portrait contains political information. The inscription contains linguistic information. Religious symbols reveal ideological change. The alloy contains economic information. Scientific research may eventually sharpen that picture further. For now, the central conclusion is already significant. Aksumite rulers controlled precious metal effectively enough to establish a high-quality royal currency, maintain recognizable coinage across generations, and adjust its standards as political and economic circumstances changed. Gold was not simply treasure. Inside an Aksumite coin, gold became data. Comparisons between Aksumite and Roman currency are unavoidable. They are also easy to exaggerate. The relationship was real, but the evidence does not justify imagining a permanent international exchange system in which Aksum mechanically copied Roman money at a fixed official rate. Early gold under Endubis appears to have been organized around a target near 2.7 grams. Numismatists have long noticed that this figure can be compared with approximately half the weight of a contemporary Roman gold unit. Given Aksum's connections with the Red Sea, Roman Egypt, and wider Mediterranean commerce, that resemblance deserves attention. Aksumite merchants and rulers existed in an environment where foreign monetary systems were known. Selecting a weight that related conveniently to recognizable international standards could make practical sense. But resemblance does not prove a fixed peg. A true peg would imply a more formal relationship in which one monetary unit was intentionally maintained against another according to an established rate. No surviving Aksumite decree tells us that one local gold coin must always equal a specified fraction of Roman currency. Nor do we possess merchant accounts demonstrating that such a conversion governed every transaction. The safest conclusion is therefore narrower. Aksum's early gold standard appears to have been created with awareness of the wider monetary environment. That is significant by itself. There were also practical reasons why weight relationships could emerge without direct government coordination. Ancient systems often relied on convenient subdivisions. Dividing a larger weight into halves is easy to understand and reproduce. Regional practices could influence several monetary traditions simultaneously. Multiple explanations may therefore overlap. The situation becomes even clearer when Aksumite currency is followed through later centuries. The early weight did not remain fixed. Gold became lighter. Issues under Ezana could fall substantially below the early Endubis range. 5th century rulers such as Abana produced gold at lower weights still. By the 6th century, surviving pieces associated with Kaleb commonly occur near 1.5 grams. At the same time, Roman and Eastern Roman monetary standards were changing according to their own history. Aksum, therefore, did not simply spend centuries issuing an unchanged miniature version of Roman currency. Its coinage developed independently. This is why claims that Aksumite money rivaled Rome require careful definition. If the phrase means Aksum possessed an economy equal in territorial size to the Roman Empire, operated the same number of mints, or produced comparable quantities of coin, the surviving evidence does not support it. Rome and later Byzantium administered monetary systems across enormous territories. Aksum was operating on a different scale. But scale is not the only measure of monetary sophistication. Aksum belonged to a relatively limited group of late antique governments capable of producing sovereign royal gold currency. Its rulers obtained precious metal. They standardized units. They placed their own portraits and inscriptions on those units. They revised standards over time. And some of their gold traveled outside Aksumite territory. That is the comparison that matters. Aksum was not simply a consumer of Roman money. It was an issuer in its own right. The changing weights also reveal an administrative structure for which almost no paperwork survives. Someone maintained reference standards. Someone determined how much metal belonged in an issue. Someone supervised production. And when standards changed, decisions had to be communicated to the mint. Those administrative choices survive today in fractions of grams. Measure enough coins from one reign and patterns appear. Compare those patterns with another reign, and changes become visible. Combine weight with metal composition, and the economic consequences become even clearer. A government can extend a fixed stock of precious metal by reducing weight, lowering fineness, or adjusting both. But monetary policy has limits. Users participate in the system too. Merchants who judge coins according to weight and quality can revise exchange values. Older pieces can become more desirable. Different currencies can trade at different rates. Money therefore rests on a negotiation between the issuer's intended standard and the user's willingness to accept it. Aksumite rulers participated in that negotiation for centuries. Roman comparisons help illuminate the process, but they should not define Aksum entirely. The kingdom adopted useful features from the larger monetary world while combining them with its own rulers, symbols, languages, and evolving economic circumstances. The resulting currency was internationally informed without becoming politically dependent. That is a more meaningful achievement than simply asking whether Aksum matched Rome. Aksum belonged to the same broad world of precious metal exchange, and it participated under its own name. Money communicates even when nobody spends it. A coin provides only a few centimeters of surface, but governments throughout history have used that space to present enormous political ideas. Aksum was no exception. Its coins were carefully constructed visual statements. Kings, crowns, plants, inscriptions, sacred symbols, and changing languages were not random decorations. They identified the authority behind the currency and explained something about how that authority wished to be understood. The king normally occupied the center. That alone transformed the object. An anonymous piece of gold could be weighed. A coin bearing a royal portrait was both metal and political communication. Different rulers appeared with forms of headgear, crowns, branches, staffs, or other objects depending on the particular issue. These portraits were not intended as modern photographs. They represented kingship. The ruler appeared recognizable, legitimate, and connected to a political and sacred order. Language reinforced the image. Greek played an important role in early Aksumite gold coinage. That made sense for a kingdom participating in Red Sea commerce and interacting with commercial communities in regions where Greek retained broad cultural and economic significance. But Greek on Aksumite money should never be interpreted as proof that the kingdom lacked its own identity. The ruler remained Aksumite. The imagery remained connected to Aksumite kingship. An international language served a local monarchy. That is cosmopolitanism rather than dependence. Over time, Ge'ez also became prominent on the coinage. The changing relationship between Greek and Ge'ez suggests that money could address more than one audience. Some messages were designed to be accessible across an international commercial environment. Others spoke more directly from within the kingdom's own linguistic world. Currency therefore provides evidence for the balance Aksum maintained between outward communication and internal political identity. The most dramatic visual transformation occurred during the 4th century. Earlier rulers had used the disc and crescent symbol connected with the monarchy's pre-Christian religious context. Under Ezana, Christianity became associated with the royal court. The coinage changed accordingly. Crosses began appearing. This is one of the most remarkable features of the Aksumite monetary record. A major ideological transformation can be watched through a sequence of tiny objects. The king remained on the coin. Money retained its economic function, but the sacred symbols surrounding royal authority had changed. Someone handling Aksumite currency across this period could literally observe a change in the monarchy's religious presentation. Before the transition, one set of sacred imagery framed royal legitimacy. Afterward, Christian imagery increasingly did so. This does not mean every person living within Aksumite territory converted at exactly the same moment. State ideology and individual belief are not the same thing. Religious change within communities can take generations. Coins tell us most clearly what the monarchy chose to communicate publicly. Even with that qualification, placing the cross on currency was politically significant. Coins moved. Temples, palaces, and inscriptions remained tied to locations. Money could travel from government institutions to merchants, between markets, through ports, across seas, and eventually into buried collections far from the place where it had been minted. Royal messaging, therefore, became mobile. In that sense, Aksumite currency functioned as one of the most portable forms of state communication available in the ancient world. Its visual identity mattered economically too. If gold already had intrinsic value, why spend effort engraving portraits and sacred symbols onto it? Because a functioning coin combines two kinds of confidence. One comes from the metal, the other comes from recognition. A known design tells the user that a piece belongs to an established monetary series and carries the authority associated with that series. A merchant may still weigh it, but identification makes evaluation faster. That is why continuity mattered. When one ruler replaced another, the entire visual language did not need to be reinvented. The portrait and name changed. Religious symbolism could evolve. Weights might be adjusted. Yet the concept of Aksumite royal currency remained recognizable. The monetary institution could survive beyond an individual reign. Selective use of gold on later silver and copper-based pieces made this communication even more sophisticated. Small amounts of gold could emphasize a cross or royal feature, while the rest of the object remained less costly metal. Material itself became part of the message. Gold looked different. It drew the eye toward the element the designer wanted viewers to notice. Across centuries, Aksumite rulers therefore used currency to explain who governed, which sacred language supported royal authority, and how new rulers remained connected to an enduring institution. Every transaction also circulated a political image. Money was not merely used to communicate value. It communicated Aksum. A coin can cross enormous distances, but a coin cannot create a road. It cannot operate a harbor, organize a caravan, maintain a warehouse, sail a ship, or guarantee that goods reach their destination. Aksum's monetary system only makes sense inside the larger infrastructure that supported commerce. The political center of Aksum stood inland in the northern highlands. Adulis linked that interior with the Red Sea. Goods moving between them crossed challenging terrain. Ivory, agricultural commodities, animal products, metals, and other resources had to be gathered, moved, stored, and transferred. Imported objects arriving at the coast faced the reverse journey inland. Every stage required people and organization. Caravan animals needed care. Travelers required provisions. Warehouses needed management. Commercial disagreements needed solutions. Routes needed sufficient security to remain useful. Political authorities could encourage trade, tax it, regulate it, or make it more difficult. This was the infrastructure behind the coin. Through Adulis, the kingdom connected with one of Late Antiquity's most important maritime corridors. To the north, the Red Sea led toward Egyptian ports, and from there toward Mediterranean markets. Across the water lay South Arabia. Beyond the Red Sea, Indian Ocean networks extended toward western India and other regions. Seasonal wind systems helped structure maritime movement farther east, giving knowledgeable sailors predictable windows in which long-distance voyages were easier. But these connections should not be imagined as requiring every Aksumite merchant to complete an enormous direct journey. Ancient trade consisted of overlapping commercial communities. Goods changed hands. Ports functioned as transfer points. Brokers connected producers with merchants. Different ships could carry the same cargo during different sections of its journey. The same principle applies to archaeological discoveries of coins. If an Aksumite piece is found far from Ethiopia or Eritrea, that discovery proves that the coin traveled. It may support a much larger body of evidence showing commercial connections. But the coin alone cannot prove that one merchant sailed directly from Adulis to the exact place where archaeologists later discovered it. Distinguishing object movement from direct human travel prevents impressive evidence from being pushed beyond what it can establish. South Arabian finds provide especially strong evidence for Aksum's external monetary presence, because they occur within a region closely connected to Aksum economically and politically. Even there, however, individual coins could have moved for different reasons. Currency may travel through trade. It may enter diplomatic exchanges or state payments. It can be stored as savings. It can accompany travelers. It can change hands repeatedly before entering a hoard. Archaeological context therefore matters enormously. Gold itself had one great advantage for long-distance movement. It concentrated value. Grain takes space. Ivory is valuable but bulky. Ceramic containers are fragile. Textiles require storage. Gold can represent substantial wealth in a tiny mass. That quality makes it useful wherever high values must be transported efficiently. For Aksumite rulers and merchants, gold currency could therefore serve in commercial exchange, government finance, diplomatic transfers, major payments, or savings. We cannot always determine which function a particular surviving coin served, but the physical properties of gold explain why it was particularly suited to an international economy. This does not mean the entire Aksumite population conducted daily life through coins. Ancient economies frequently combined currencies with credit, customary obligations, barter, commodity exchange, and weighed metal. A rural community could operate very differently from a merchant community at a Red Sea port. Gold coins therefore reveal one important layer of Aksum's economy, rather than describing every transaction inside the kingdom. They are especially informative where government power, high-value exchange, and long-distance movement overlapped. Imported archaeological material reinforces the picture. Ceramics, glass, amphory, metal objects, and other goods produced outside the Horn reached Aksumite contexts. Those objects provide physical evidence that distant industries were connected to consumers within Aksum's economic sphere. At the same time, products from Africa entered maritime circulation in the opposite direction. Aksum occupied the connection between inland resources and overseas markets. That position could generate revenue. Ports could produce customs income. Trade could be taxed. Control over routes could increase the economic value of political institutions. Revenue, in turn, could support administration, state security, royal projects, and the infrastructure on which commerce depended. A reinforcing cycle becomes possible. Trade strengthens institutions. Institutions help maintain conditions in which trade can continue. Successful commerce increases the value of routes and ports. Their increasing value makes them politically important. Currency helps transmit value through parts of this system. The coin was not the entire economic structure. It was one component connecting the others. The mint standardized units. Caravans moved goods. Adulis linked interior and coast. Ships extended the network. Government gave the system a political framework. By the 6th century, the connection between economic geography and political influence would become especially visible on the Arabian side of the Red Sea. There, Aksumite gold accumulated in extraordinary numbers. One of the clearest demonstrations of Aksumite gold outside Africa did not come from a royal inscription. It came from a container of coins discovered in Yemen. The Al-Madhariba, Hoard contained 1,194 gold pieces. Of those, 868 were Aksumite. Another 326 were Roman. Those numbers immediately changed the scale of the story. This was not a single Aksumite coin that happened to cross the Red Sea. Hundreds of royal gold pieces had entered a South Arabian environment where Roman imperial currency was also being accumulated. The Aksumite component included issues extending from Ezana through later rulers, including Kaleb. For numismatists, the discovery dramatically expanded the surviving evidence available for studying the kingdom's gold currency. The first temptation is to treat all coins found together as though they had circulated identically. That would go too far. A hoard records the final moment at which objects were stored together. It does not automatically reveal every step that brought them there. Different currencies could have arrived at different dates or through different processes, where patterns, chronology, and frequency can complicate the picture. Imagine opening a modern safe containing dollars, euros, old coins, and gold jewelry. Their presence together would demonstrate that one owner valued them. It would not prove they had all been used for identical everyday purchases. The same principle applies at Al-Madhariba. What the hoard demonstrates most clearly is convergence. Aksumite and Roman gold both became forms of stored wealth in the same South Arabian setting. That is already historically significant. It places Aksum's royal currency inside an environment that also received the money of a major Mediterranean imperial system. The proportion of Aksumite pieces is particularly striking. They outnumber the Roman coins in this individual deposit. That does not prove that Aksum possessed a larger economy than Rome, nor does it establish that Aksumite currency dominated every market in Yemen. One hoard cannot represent an entire region, but it does prove that substantial quantities of Aksumite gold accumulated abroad. South Arabia also had significance beyond commerce. Communities on the African and Arabian sides of the Red Sea had interacted for centuries through migration, language, trade, religion, and political competition. During the early 6th century, under King Kaleb, Aksum intervened directly in Yemen. The circumstances were complex. Himyarite politics, religious tensions, Christian and Jewish communities, Eastern Roman diplomacy, regional rivalries, and Aksumite ambitions all shaped events. Reducing the entire episode to competition for commercial routes would therefore oversimplify the evidence. Religion and diplomacy mattered greatly, but an overseas campaign also required economic capacity. Ships had to be available. Crews required support. Personnel required provisions and equipment. Political allies could require gifts or payments. Administration required resources. Precious metal was valuable in such circumstances because so much purchasing power could be concentrated in a small, portable object. Currency did not determine political outcomes. It did not create ships or substitute for diplomacy. What it could do was support the institutional systems that allowed a government to operate beyond its immediate center. The relationship between money and geopolitics therefore becomes visible without needing to claim that currency alone produced Aksum's power. The region in which Aksumite gold accumulated was also a region in which the monarchy pursued direct political interests. Commercial and strategic geography overlapped. The hoard also helps clarify the Roman comparison. The fact that Roman and Aksumite gold appear together does not establish monetary equality between the two states. A more defensible conclusion is that the two monetary traditions coexisted in the same South Arabian environment. Aksumite kings produced gold with enough recognized value to enter a region where Roman imperial money was also accepted and preserved. The weights did not need to be identical. The political systems behind them did not need to be equal. The crucial point is that Aksum was not merely passing foreign gold through its territory. Its own currency crossed the Red Sea. That is monetary sovereignty in physical form. The discovery also demonstrates a difference between political borders and monetary borders. A ruler does not need to govern every place where his currency appears. Foreign merchants can accept a gold piece for its composition, weight, or reputation without owing any political loyalty to the person whose portrait it carries. Currency, therefore, creates another kind of geography. Not a map defined entirely by frontiers and government administration, but one shaped by trust, exchange, and movement. That geography can extend remarkably far. The Al-Madhariba hoard proves that Aksumite economic identity traveled beyond the highlands and beyond Adulis. Royal portraits, Christian symbols, inscriptions, and changing monetary standards all crossed the Red Sea with the gold. In that sense, every coin became a miniature representative of the system that created it. The hoard does not prove that Aksum equaled Rome economically. It cannot reveal the transaction history of every individual piece. What it proves is more precise and more useful. Aksum produced gold currency that people outside Aksum considered valuable enough to retain. For an ancient monetary system, that is powerful evidence that confidence had traveled beyond the borders of the issuing state. The earliest Aksumite gold is associated with relatively high fineness and carefully controlled weights. But successful monetary systems rarely remain unchanged forever. Across the centuries, Aksum's currency evolved. Average gold weights declined. The proportion of precious metal also shifted. Later series introduced new technical and material characteristics. Eventually, the long tradition of Aksumite royal coinage came to an end. Those developments provide some of the most valuable economic evidence the kingdom left behind. They also need to be interpreted without turning them into a simple story of decline. It would be easy to compare an early high-fineness coin with a later less pure example and conclude that strong rulers once produced good money while weaker rulers damaged it. Real economies are rarely that simple. Governments alter monetary systems for many reasons. The available supply of precious metal may change. Government expenditure may rise. Commercial routes can be reorganized. Tax revenues can shift. Producing more pieces from the same stock of gold may become desirable. Several factors can operate simultaneously. Because no surviving Aksumite treasury report explains each monetary reform, historians must reconstruct change from the coins and their wider context. The overall direction is nevertheless measurable. Early Endubis gold commonly falls around a reconstructed standard near 2.7 grams. Later Aksumite gold became substantially lighter. Examples associated with Ezana and Kaleb frequently occur near 1.5 grams. Scientific studies also indicate that some later gold contains significantly less precious metal than many early issues. Economically, that means the quantity of gold represented by the official unit changed considerably. Imagine a government possessing a finite supply of precious metal. If each coin weighs about 2.7 grams and contains very high-quality gold, only a certain number of pieces can be made. Reduce the overall weight and introduce a larger proportion of other metal, and the same quantity of gold can contribute to a much larger number of coins. That may provide flexibility when circumstances change. But users respond too. Merchants evaluating currency by metal content can alter the amount they are willing to exchange for it. Older and heavier pieces may be retained rather than spent. Different issues can acquire different market reputations. Official value and intrinsic metal value do not always move together perfectly. This is why monetary change cannot automatically be labeled a crisis. Some reductions may represent deliberate policy responses to new realities. What matters is that the long-term monetary trend fits within a broader transformation in Aksum's political and economic environment. Archaeology around the capital indicates changes in settlement, building, imported goods, and elite activity during the later period. Monumental construction became less prominent. Patterns of long-distance exchange evolved. The political environment of the Red Sea also changed dramatically. The Eastern Roman and Sasanian empires entered a prolonged period of conflict. South Arabia experienced major political transformations. During the 7th century, emerging Islamic powers reshaped commercial and political relationships around the Red Sea, Arabia, and Eastern Mediterranean. None of this requires imagining that Aksum simply ended on a single date. Historical transformation rarely works that way. Political centers move. Commercial routes change. Populations reorganize. Institutions develop new forms. Religious and cultural traditions can survive long after earlier political structures have altered. The heritage of Aksum continued to influence the Ethiopian highlands even after the kingdom's classical international configuration had changed. Coinage allows us to watch parts of that process incrementally. Reduced weight is one clue. Changing fineness is another. Changes in size, imagery, and manufacture add additional evidence. Later base metal currency became increasingly important in sections of the monetary series. Selective gilding demonstrates continuing experimentation. By placing small amounts of gold on particular royal or Christian symbols, the mint could preserve visual hierarchy without manufacturing the entire object from precious metal. That technique should not automatically be interpreted as proof of one specific financial emergency. But it does show that Aksumite monetary authorities were managing symbolism and material value separately. The state remained innovative even while conditions changed. Currency thus behaves almost like a pulse. Early issues reveal one combination of resources and standards. Later issues reveal adjustment. Eventually, regular royal minting disappears. The surviving record cannot tell us the cause of every individual change, but it does show that the relationship between precious metal supply, government resources, and monetary policy was evolving. That makes later Aksumite coinage just as historically important as the celebrated early gold. A currency does not provide evidence only when an economy is prosperous. Its adjustments become especially informative when circumstances grow less predictable. Aksum's monetary history is therefore better understood as a sequence of creation, expansion, adaptation, and transformation. Early rulers built the institution. Later rulers inherited it and modified it. The persistence of coinage across centuries demonstrates how closely currency had become connected with royal authority. The metal changed. The political need to communicate legitimacy through money remained. And in those changing fractions of gold, we can watch Aksum's economic foundations themselves evolve. Return once more to the small gold coin with which this story began. It no longer looks like a simple portrait on metal. It looks like an entire institutional system compressed into a few grams. Its gold points toward resource networks, commerce, taxation, political obligations, recycling, or some combination of them. Its weight points toward measurement and administration. Its engraved surface points toward specialized workers and an organized mint. Its language reveals decisions about communication. Its sacred imagery records changes in royal ideology. Its fine spot can reveal movement beyond political borders. Its chemistry may contain information about the metal's earlier history. And when hundreds of coins are compared across generations, their changing weights and compositions provide evidence for transformations in state capacity. That is why Aksumite currency deserves to be treated as more than a collection of attractive archaeological objects. It sits at the intersection of economics, technology, religion, politics, and international trade. But one question remains. Was currency itself responsible for Aksum's regional influence? Only in a qualified sense. Aksum's importance rested on several foundations. Geography mattered enormously. The kingdom occupied a strategic position between the Northern Horn and the Red Sea. Agricultural production supported communities and political centers in the highlands. Adulis gave the state access to maritime commerce. African resources entered wider markets. Merchants and intermediaries connected the kingdom with Arabia, Egypt, the Mediterranean, and Indian Ocean trading communities. Political organization protected and coordinated important institutions. Religion and diplomacy connected Aksum with wider networks of influence. Coinage did not replace those foundations. It helped connect them. Gold entered the political economy. The state converted portions of that metal into standardized units. Royal designs identified those units. Coins could then circulate through commerce, treasuries, major government payments, diplomatic exchanges, and international transactions. Economic activity generated revenue. Revenue could strengthen institutions. Institutions could help maintain routes and ports. Commercial success made those routes increasingly valuable. The result was a reinforcing relationship between economic activity and political power. Currency was one mechanism within that relationship. It transformed precious metal into a portable and recognizable expression of government authority. That interpretation is stronger than claiming Aksum merely copied Rome. Mediterranean influence clearly mattered. The earliest Aksumite gold standard invites comparison with Roman monetary weights. Greek inscriptions offered international linguistic reach. Portrait coinage itself belonged to a tradition far older and geographically broader than Aksum. But Aksum selected these tools and reshaped them. Its rulers placed their own portraits on the currency. They used symbols meaningful within their own political world. Christian imagery transformed the design after Ezana. Ge'ez entered the monetary language. Weight standards evolved according to Aksum's history. Gold, silver, and copper-based denominations became parts of a distinctive royal system. This was neither isolation nor passive imitation. It was adaptation under sovereign authority. The same care should be taken when comparing Aksum with Rome. Aksum did not equal the Roman Empire in territory, population, number of mints, or total monetary production. It does not need to have done so for its coinage to be historically remarkable. The meaningful comparison is institutional. Aksum was one of the governments of late antiquity capable of producing royal gold under its own authority and moving some of that currency into international circulation. The Al-Madhariba, Hoard captures the point beautifully. Roman and Aksumite gold ended up together in Yemen. They belonged to different states. They did not necessarily circulate according to identical rules. Their economies were not identical in scale. Yet two sovereign monetary traditions converged in the same South Arabian store of wealth. That discovery changes the way the economic map of late antiquity should be imagined. If the period is narrated entirely outward from the Mediterranean, Africa can appear peripheral. African commodities leave for markets elsewhere. African ports become stops on routes whose center is assumed to lie somewhere else. Put Aksum and Adulis near the center of the map, and the geography looks different. North lies Egypt and the Mediterranean. East lies Arabia. Southeast opens toward the Indian Ocean. Inland networks reach African communities and resource zones. From that perspective, Aksum occupied an important intersection rather than a distant margin. Future research may refine the picture considerably. New analytical techniques could clarify changing metal supplies. New archaeological discoveries may identify commercial contexts that are presently uncertain. Additional coin finds could alter chronology or reveal unexpected patterns of movement. That openness is a strength of evidence-based history. Interpretations improve as new evidence appears. What we already know, however, is substantial. By the late 3rd century, Aksumite rulers had established a multi-metal currency. Early gold combined controlled weight with high precious metal content. Coins carried imagery and languages capable of communicating both royal authority and international awareness. Christianization transformed their sacred symbolism. Aksumite gold traveled beyond the kingdom, particularly into South Arabia. Later changes in weight and fineness preserve evidence of monetary adaptation. Together, those developments reveal impressive technical and administrative capacity. The central achievement was not simply possessing gold. It was organizing gold. Metal had to become a measured blank. The blank had to become recognizable currency. Recognition had to create confidence. And that confidence had to remain meaningful even after the coin moved beyond the immediate reach of the ruler who issued it. When all of those steps succeeded, Aksumite authority could travel inside a merchant's hand, across the Red Sea, or into a treasury hundreds of kilometers away. That is the economic blueprint preserved by the coins. Not the story of an African kingdom copying another civilization. Not an imaginary competition in which Aksum had to defeat Rome economically. It is the story of an African state constructing a sovereign monetary language and using it within one of the most interconnected trading environments of the ancient world. Aksum's ancient ships have disappeared. Its merchants left few personal accounts, and the voices of the administrators, engravers, metalworkers, and traders who sustained its monetary system have largely been lost. But the coins remain. Inside, only a few grams of metal survive traces of royal ambition, religious transformation, careful calculation, international exchange, and an economy adapting to a changing world. Their presence across the Red Sea demonstrates that Aksumite wealth moved beyond Aksumite territory. Their changing weights and compositions reveal a monetary institution capable of adjusting across centuries. And their survival gives us a different perspective on Africa's place in the ancient economy. Aksum's monetary achievement was not that it reproduced Rome's system. It was that the kingdom created currency under its own authority, and made that authority recognizable far beyond its capital. Sometimes the blueprint of an international power is carved into a monument. Sometimes it weighs less than 3 grams,